first have to create your organizational diagram and your structure. And then the schedule needs to reflect that organizational structure, because nothing gets done except through that organization. That's why it's called collaborative consultants, because they believe in collaboration is the most powerful tool there is.
Hi, I'm Clayton Carpenter. I'm here with Dave Bice, retired program manager and engineer. Today we're going to talk about an organization, what exactly the organization needs to be for your company, how it goes from a small organization to a big organization, and everything in between. So thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Clayton. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Really, organization is critical to the execution of the business. Nothing gets done in an organization or in a company except through that organization. So when you think about how you're going to organize it and structure it, you really have to put some strategy behind it. And it's critical that we understand what's the vision of the company and what's the culture, and define those things in real terms so that the structure of the company matches the vision and the culture that we're trying to achieve. So as you know, many times companies will say, well, I want to be a green company, and I want to be environmentally friendly, I want to be innovative, we want to be kind to the community. All of those things are what we are about, and so the organization should reflect those things in how we organize, how we plan to execute our job. So as we're trying to define the structure of the organization, you first really have to define what's the vision and what's the culture, and how does that impact the structure of our organization. So first and foremost, you really need to find out, okay, what is the product that we're developing, and then how does that fit with the vision and the culture of the organization. So there's several different types of structures of organization. There's a functional organization where you break it down into the actual functions of the company, things like design, and production, manufacturing, quality. Those are some of the basic functions of an organization. Legal, all of that is there. And then you could have a product organization where you align yourself based on the structure, or create the structure based on the product features. So you may say, well, I've got aircraft, or I've got wings and tails and fins, or different elements of the things that you sell, as an example, and those could be product structures as well. Or you can do a matrix, which is kind of a combination of the two. So you can create a product structure algorithm, or columns, and then maybe along the horizontal axis have functions, and that all support those products. And so that's another way of doing it, is creating a matrix organization that fits between those two. So as a subset of that, one of the ones the favorite organization that I truly like, especially for the aerospace industry, has been centered around integrated product teams, which is really a subset of a matrix organization. And that aligns the product structure with a functional organization, so that each function of the organization is represented on each product team. So if you've got, for example, maybe a fuselage section, a wing, a tail, systems, avionics as an example, wiring, all of those would be different parts of an airplane as an example, and different products that get created, and they are all supported by the different functions like design and manufacturing, engineering, stress, aero performance. All of those would have, depending on the team, different makeups of the team that would affect that. So wing, for example, or wing would have like aero performance. It would also have stress and loads, but wiring would have more electrical and the electrical design folks, plus maybe manufacturing, but would not necessarily have as much stress, or certainly not any aero loads would be affected by the wiring. So those would be examples of how you would mix and match some of that. And then as a critical part of that, you need to have the suppliers. Your critical suppliers should be integrated into your product teams so that you're supporting a specific part of the product and that those are critical elements to your team. Those, that way you can align your organization so that each element, each team lead, if you will, starts organizing their team like it was its own company almost, so that they are a subset of the larger company and they can execute in similar fashion. So you break down the schedule, you break down the cost, you break down the performance at every level down to those sub-teams. And then they can execute appropriately and manage their business as almost like a separate little company to itself.
So what's the communication in between those groups? How often does the IPTs, right?
Yeah, so the IPTs, my experience, the best way is should be meeting weekly and coordinating requirements across it, and then there will be some daily communications that happen when you get very tactical. So communication is really key throughout the whole process, and it should be, you need to define what method of communication you want to be using. So communication happens in many different forms. It can happen in meetings, it can happen in email, it can happen in written or documented form, it can happen in phone calls, and it can happen electronically, like sharing on a SharePoint or on a Google Drive as well. How we want to communicate within the teams needs to be documented. And we need to be clear with everybody when communication should be used for different types. So, for example, a performance review should be held in a face-to-face, one-on-one discussion, right? It's not something you're going to put on a Instagram page for everyone to see or on a website and say, here's your performance review, and for everyone publicly to see. That wouldn't be appropriate. And then there's other forms where that would be, that form of communication is very valuable to put out on a website where everybody can see. So as an example, it might be a requirements document where you want everybody to be able to have quick access to that requirements document so they can refer to it when they're doing their design work. Or they're trying to do the analysis, say, well, what was the requirement for that? And they can pull that up very quickly. So when you're trying to communicate information about specific items that everyone needs, you need to make that very visible, very easy to access. When it gets to personal conversations, you want to drive that to more one-on-one conversations. And then there are going to be times where you want to have a mix, where you get a group of people together, you review a design, and so you want that to be in person or virtually, using WebEx or something like that, where you can all gather around and from all the different disciplines critique the current state of the design at the time and assess it for risks. So when you're doing a risk assessment, that's something that you want to do in a collaborative way with multiple people in the room, getting multiple perspectives. It's important to think about what kind of perspectives do we need. Is this a communication that's just a one-way, or is it a two-way dialogue? And have that discussion happen. So, or is it a decision-making meeting? Maybe we need to make a decision about a specific design process. Those are all critical to understand what we're trying to accomplish, and the purpose for the meeting, the purpose for the communication, and then make sure all the relevant parties are present for that. And around decision making, it's vitally critical that we make timely decisions with all the affected parties in the room at the time. Once a decision is made, we're all moving forward with that. It doesn't mean that you can't regroup and reverse the decision, but for the most part, you want to make a decision and move forward. The time for debate is gone. We're going to move forward unless you run across a significant problem that's going to stop you in your tracks. You can't accomplish it. But once you have the debate, you make the decision as a team, and then you move forward and the debate is over. It's critical that you have that kind of decision where you can move forward. If you're constantly in a cycle where you're debating it over and over and over again, you get caught in this cycle where you never make a decision, and in the end, you never produce a product because you're constantly evaluating and reevaluating your decisions.
sorry for interrupting. So as a leader, how do you keep the organization on that? You talk about the hidden and the non-hidden agenda, correct?
Yeah.
So how do you, as a leader, keep it either above the table or below the table and kind of keep it through that decision-making process?
So there's kind of two aspects to this. So in an organization, you're going to have a documented organization as to how you intended it to operate. In reality, there's always going to be elements that are not quite documented and as to how the organization actually functions. So I'll give you a simple example of that. In maybe let's say a legal office, for example, you're trying to get to the lawyer, but you have to go through the administrative assistant before you can get to the lawyer. And so the organization may not reflect it that way in an org chart. They're going to show all the different lawyers and how that's structured, but really to the real person that's influencing the decision is that administrative assistant in many cases. And so that may be an example of a hidden authority that's really not documented in the organization, but it's really good to make sure that the organization understands it and uses that effectively. So there could be a person who's actually doing the majority of the work, not necessarily being reflected in an organizational diagram, but when the work is actually getting implemented, you can see that that's really where the work goes through. So being able to elevate that, try to minimize what's really hidden, and make sure that everybody understands this is the process that we go through. We go through the administrative assistant before we get to the next phase, so that's a critical part of the process. It's important to make sure that those hidden things aren't hidden from the people who matter. It may not be something you want to document for customers, but within the organization, you definitely need to have it clear to everybody how the process works and who's responsible for making what decisions and how that decision is made. So keeping that open and above board is critical. And then there's the decisions themselves. Making timely decisions is so important. You can't understate the value of timely decisions. Making no decision is worse than making a bad decision. So oftentimes when we want to delay a decision because you don't have all the information, and we don't really understand the impact of a late decision. So what I like to do is integrate all of the decisions that need to be made into the master schedule. And by documenting the decision points that have to be made along the way, you make it very visible in your schedule as to when those decisions have to be made. And by linking those decisions to subsequent activities that have to be performed, you now understand the importance of making that timely decision, because if you delay that decision, it's now going to slip everything afterwards that has to happen. And if you miss those critical milestones, now you potentially put your whole corporation in jeopardy. If you miss a critical milestone like a flight test activity, which was critical for an investor demonstration or gaining additional investment from other investors, or meeting a milestone for a customer wanting to accept delivery of a product, all of those things could bankrupt the company if you're not careful. So a late decision, and oftentimes if we don't have them linked to the milestones that we have in the schedule, we don't understand the impact of what that's going to mean to us by making a late decision. So it's so easy to say, well, I don't have all the information, I'm just going to postpone the decision. Many times you don't have that luxury. And if you don't have it linked into the schedule, you don't know that. So that's why I like to link them into the schedule and make sure that they're tied to those key milestones that we have in the company. And then you get to understand what the impact is.
And that's when you loop in similar, the checks and balances system, similar to the government organization or something like that.
Yes.
Where if you make that possibly wrong decision, but you make it and you're not behind, it'll be corrected rather than, like you said, have nothing on the line. Or what's the best scenario on that?
So oftentimes when you're evaluating a decision, you never have a clear answer, right? Very seldom do you have a clear answer. In fact, I had a mentor one time that used to say, all decisions are easy. when he first said that to me, I was like, what are you talking about? I don't think all decisions are easy. He said, oh no, they are. All decisions are easy. And he said it very simply. If you have two things to decide between, and one is clearly better than the other, it's just obvious upon first inspection, well then you know what to do. It's an easy decision. If on the other hand, they're not so easy to decide between, let's say one has pros, the other have cons, or they both have pros and cons, they both have benefits as well, then it's not as critical to choose one or the other. But not choosing one, just delaying the decision, makes it the worst of all worlds. So by choosing one, may be a little bit more work over the other one, but it's not catastrophic. Not choosing one could be catastrophic to the company. So as long as you're making a timely decision, in his view, all decisions were easy. But delaying a decision was the worst thing you could do. And the easy ones are easy, and the hard one means there's really not as big a difference between them. One may be a little bit more work in the end, but in the end, at least you're getting something done.
And it probably makes it a lot easier along the process if there's actually one person in each role, so that those decisions don't get backed up on.
Yeah, so that's really important too. It's that in every role, you want to document who is the person responsible for that role. So when you're aligning your organization with your integrated product teams, you want to make sure that you put one person in that role. Now he can have multiple spots, so he can be maybe the lead for design, he can be the lead for the loads, he can be the lead for the stress. That's okay, but recognize that as you grow as an organization, that person won't be able to handle all three of those roles for long. And then, but that identifies when you've got a single person filling in 3 spots, that you've clearly defined the roles and responsibilities for each role. And then, as that evolves, you can have what the roles and responsibilities are for how you're going to hire in to backfill that role. What happens a lot of times is we build an organization around people and what that person is capable of. And so you wind up describing the job description for many different things. Let's say, for example, integration and testing, which are somewhat related, but they are very different roles. So the integration assembles an aircraft, and then the testing actually tests those components and make sure that they meet the specifications that they were designed for. Those are really 2 very distinct roles. Oftentimes you may have a person that fills both of them, but it's best to have those as 2 separate boxes in your organizational document. Describe the roles and responsibilities for each, and it's okay if you have a person filling both roles, but eventually you're going to need someone that fills each one individually.
What's your favorite way to document that? Is that a digital thing, or is that a physical piece of paper to document who's in what role throughout the organization?
Well, I think it goes several different ways. You want to document it in a form electronically, typically, where I draw a diagram showing what the relationships are between the different organizations. Who's reporting to whom? What's that structure look like? A lot of people get tied up that creates a hierarchy, and that many people don't want to show a hierarchy in their organization. But I think it can be very helpful depending on the stage that you're in your company, is showing what the relationships are between who's making what decision and how we are each interrelated in the organization. And then each role should have a document, either a Word document or some sort of form, maybe it's a wiki page or something that's publicly available for everyone to see, is what the roles and responsibilities are for each part of the organization. So it's documented, I can go look at it and say, oh, I understand what that person does. Because if you don't do that, then people won't know how they are supposed to interface with each other and who I go to for information. So we have to document that and make it clear to everybody, and then they understand their position within the company and what their role is.
What does it look like when it's stacked with the schedule? So the organizational chart, the schedule and the budget, at one point those are all put together, is that right?
That's right. So they all tie together. So what happens is you first have to create your organizational diagram in your structure, and then the schedule needs to reflect that organizational structure, because nothing gets done except through that organization. So you take your organizational structure and then you start aligning the tasks that each section of the organization is going to be performing. And as you lay out that schedule, then you identify what the relationships are between each of the different teams within that organization. So a design team is going to design a part of the product, then they're going to deliver that design to the tooling. Tooling is going to manufacture tooling, then they're going to deliver that to a manufacturing, where they'll start taking the tooling and the design and manufacturing the part. And they deliver it to the integration, they deliver it to test, and so forth. So as you lay out each of those tasks, you then begin to build a schedule that supports the entire organization. And that schedule supports the overall budget that can be time phased for the entire organization. So you can track schedule, you can schedule cost, you can schedule performance. How are we performing against that? Measure each of those along the way. And that's critical to an execution of a program, to be able to hit technical cost, technical performance, and schedule as well. So I can meet every single one of those as I move forward.
Sorry, is that all?
No, yeah.
So how do you communicate that through the team? Is Slack, things like Slack? Or
That's
is it-
one way. There's many different tools of communication. Some companies are now using Slack as a way of communicating messages. I look at Slack as a kind of a Facebook for a business environment, where you can create different channels. You can, a very quick and easy way of communicating, but it can also be overdone. So I think email is another great way of communicating. What I've discovered over the last few years is that different generations are more comfortable communicating in different ways and with different mechanisms. When I was in my early career, the main way of communicating was through a written document that you would send from one company to the next, or from one person to the next. Everything was done in memos. So there would be a secretary that would type everything up, and you would send a memo to the next team or organization. Everything was done through memos. A very time-consuming process. Emails started to become more prevalent now. Facebook and Slack messages are happening, so we're evolving into a more electronic age. People are creating wiki pages, Confluence, being able to share documents electronically, collaborate with them in an open environment, creating a much more powerful, fast-moving pace for us to update and store our documents and create changes as we go. It's evolved very, very fast. And companies have to adapt to those fast-changing paces, because customers expect for us to be able to respond in that way. So how we communicate, how we store our documents are critically important to the organization and to how we are going to structure ourselves and make our decisions.
With your servant style leadership, as you as a personal program manager, what organization usually fits best for something like that?
Well, it really depends on the culture of the organization, and every person is going to have their own style of leadership. So mine tends to be more geared towards a servant style leadership, and I think for me personally, the communication approach is more of a collaborative approach, where I tend to operate in that mode, and I think there's a lot of power behind that. But you have to be a leader, really be true to yourself. So when you do that, you want to look at for your own strengths. What are you really good at? And how do the tools that you use as a leader match your strengths that you want to mirror within your organization? So try to align that appropriately, but then also look to what are the strengths of your organization and how does your team operate best, and match those to the team as well as to yourself, so that you can align your organization and the tools that you use relative to the skills that you have and the way you like to operate, both as a team and as an individual. So you can tailor all of those things to meet the specific needs of your organization. And I wouldn't say there's one tool that fits all. I think they should all be tailored to the specific skill sets that you have as a team and as an individual.
So sometimes you have to walk in as a consultant or a new manager on a project, you have to walk in and completely rearrange the organization. Is that a common thing?
Yeah, it can be. So there was an example for me where I got hired into a company to develop or take over a program. And when I looked at the organizational structure, it didn't make any sense to me at all as to how it was structured. And so I started talking to people and understanding how they operated and why they were operating or structured in that manner. So I met with the team, I talked to them about the way we were structured, and I proposed a different way of organizing, more along the lines of an integrated product team. And we had some very clear guidelines or clear products that we were delivering. There were our product that we had two very distinct boxes or pieces of equipment that were tied to each other. We had an electronics box and a sensing box, and and we weren't organized that way at all. So I proposed that we have a structure where we did organize that way and focused on building those that equipment separately and with separate teams. At first it was met with a lot of resistance. People didn't see the need for that. But that organization was failing dramatically. Every customer that had that had told me when I came on board that we were going to lose that contract with them. They said, we are about ready to pull the plug, you will not get the next award. And in fact, my predecessor had told everybody there were not going to be any more awards. This was the end of the line. That really wasn't true. Every customer had a next version that they wanted to go to, a next set of awards that they were going to go to. So, and in one customer had actually given us a red quality rating, which was the worst you could be, and we were on notice for they were going to pull the plug because we were failing in our quality of delivery to them.
No, finish and don't be humble now, tell what happened.
So within a year, we went from, we won the award, we restructured, we became more efficient, we were more cost effective, we improved our performance by becoming profitable to the tune of, in some cases, as much as 20% profit margins. We were delivering our product on time, and with the one that had given us a red quality rating, we went from red to gold within 1 year. Now to get to gold, you had to show a flawless execution to all of their quality standards for a solid year. So by the time we had come on board, or I came on board, we were able to hit it seemingly flawlessly. I say that, I'll explain that in a second, for the entire year. Didn't have one failure or one quality negative impact. Now, I say that seemingly because we actually did have a bad quality rating at one point. Not a rating, but a quality incident. We discovered in that product that we were getting this fungus that was growing on one of our electronic cards. And many of our products had gotten shipped with that fungus on it. The product performed properly. We ran all of our ATPs and everything was performing fine, but there shouldn't have been that fungus growing on the board. And someone pointed it out and said, that just doesn't look right. So they tested it, and that part or that fungus turned out to be toxic to humans. It could have killed our customers, it could have killed our employees. It was that toxic to people. So we shut down the line, we informed the customer immediately that we had discovered this problem, and we engaged the customer throughout that process. And you would think this would be a very negative quality rating for this to happen. Even though all of our tests that we were performing passed in the performance of assembling it. But the fact that we found it, we identified it, we tested it, we told the customer we would fix every single thing. We told them, do not open the boxes, send them back to us. We're going to put it in a controlled environment, remove them. We put our employees in protective gear that had to handle this equipment. We cleaned every single one. We discovered what the cause of the problem was, which was an outgassing of actually some wood in that was in our inventory area, the place where we store our warehouse. The wood was outgassing and causing, even though the bags were supposed to be hermetically sealed, when they opened it, they scored it with an X-Acto knife and exposed it to the elements. And the longer they sat there, the longer they got exposed to the outgassing of the wood and created this toxic chemical. So, sorry for the long story.
No, it's a good example for people.
At the end of the year, the customer came back and said the way that we handled that situation, the way that we kept them engaged, every single day we had a meeting on this, and the customer was involved from day one on understanding how we were addressing the problem, even though we didn't know all the answers. They were involved in every single meeting we had. I had shut down the line at the very beginning. They said the way we handled that was superb. They understand things are going to happen, and we were totally open and transparent with them in all of our communications. And so they said, we give you a gold rating, even though that happened, because of the way we handled it, not because of the fact that it happened, but the way that we handled it, it gave us a gold rating. So the way we executed was superb. The team did an awesome job. The team was organized in a way to execute flawlessly, and they did an outstanding job. And it's amazing how they came together and solved that significant problem. And a mentor of mine once said, you don't really know the measure of a team until they're really tested. And so that was an example of how they were tested. And I was proud of the way that they took on that challenge and burned down and repaired everything at our cost, and we still made profit, even though we had to pull every single one of those units back that was contaminated.
And do you attribute that to the IPT, to that structure
Absolutely.
of everyone being so focused on one part?
Yeah. If we hadn't have been, it would have been easy to blame other people, and they wouldn't have known whose responsibility it was for taking care of that. But we had one IPT lead who was responsible for that component. He knew it was his job. He took the lead. He took the bull by the horns and coordinated the meetings. And it was kind of funny, the very first time this happened, he came to me, I remember this day very clearly, and he said, we got this problem. He said, we need to call the customer. He said, wait, we don't know the answers yet. I said, it doesn't matter. You need to call them, make them aware. And it was that was really important. It was kind of uncomfortable for him in the beginning. He said, no, I'm used to waiting until we have all the answers before we call the customer. I said, then it's too late. We need to inform them immediately, tell them we don't know all the answers, be open and honest, and engage them as part of the process. And that's what really ultimately got us the gold rating, was by being transparent and opening up. And it was a little uncomfortable because they hadn't done it that way in the past. But in the end, Charles was the guy's name, came to me and said this was absolutely the best way to do it. He was so happy that he kept the customer engaged the whole time.
And do you see that I would call it an era of transparency now with the internet and more transparency in the offices, and it seems like a lot more is open with technology and interviews being recorded and things. People are starting to see, hey, maybe we should just do this from the jump. Maybe we should be more transparent from the start.
Yeah, but it's overcoming a culture in a history where people have always been reluctant to share bad news, and also a matter of judging people prematurely. So customers could come down and say, oh, we're going to hold you accountable, and before you have all the answers and you really know whatever happened. And so the customer we dealt with was really good. He was very appreciative that we kept him involved and aware of the problems at the time, but he also was willing to hold judgment and say, okay, I'll wait till you get the answers. I understand you need to work through this problem. And so if we had waited to say, okay, now we have all the answers, and then maybe we didn't, it would have looked really bad on us. To say up front, we don't know all the answers. We're willing to admit we've made a mistake, and we're searching for the answers, and we're willing to solicit your help, or at least your participation, so you understand what's happening in real time. Every single meeting we held, we kept them tied in on the phone or in person, so they could participate with us. And they were extremely appreciative of that. And I think they value that. So when you treat them as adults, they will in turn treat us as adults as well.
Never hurts to communicate, does it?
No. But it also, you have to communicate honestly and try not to hide anything from your customer so that they know what's going on at the time.
Awesome. Anything else on the organization?
I think I've covered it. It's nothing, as I said, nothing gets done but through that organization. So being clear and open and honest and building that trust with your customer is critical.
Sweet, well, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Clayton.
And you can find everything at collaborativeconsultants.net, and you'll learn a lot more about the portal, one-on-ones with different consultants, and much more. Thank you.